might relate to this. You know, playing Starfield, walking around these planets and admiring the beautiful NPCs, obviously. And then you go to a new planet and you think, wow, it would be really nice if I could get some more FPS when I'm exploring these gorgeous rocks, or whatever you do in Starfield. So you go to your game settings and you turn your graphics from high to low. And then you think, that's it. I barely got any change in my FPS whatsoever. That's because Starfield is just one of the many games that have been following this trend where the settings menu in these games is merely an illusion. It's been the same story for Alan Wake 2, Remnant 2, it really doesn't matter. All these new games coming out right now, the settings menu has been boiled down to this one very controversial setting. DLSS, FSR, or XESS, whatever upscaler you want to choose. I made a previous video called Is DLSS Ruining Games? And judging by the absolutely wild attention this video got, I never thought it was going to do this well. I thought this was a very niche issue that no one really cared about. But through this, I've seen so many comments that are kind of like smart-ass comments where they're literally just saying, yes. It's like they're responding to the question itself. Is DLSS ruining games? Yes. Yeah, it's a smart-ass comment, but at the same time, there has to be some truth behind that. And if you do look at the top comment on the video, it does say FSR and DLSS should only really be a nice little boost to your FPS if you already have a solid frame rate and shouldn't be required to make the game work right. This seems to be the sentiment that the community has. And DLSS, FSR, these have some fundamental issues. I mean, they can be basically used by game developers to cheat their way to good performance, like how this top comment is talking about here. Even it can allow AMD or Nvidia to claim that their graphics cards are getting more performance than they actually are. And both of these things for us as gamers really suck. And that's why I realize that the thing I'm about to say might make a lot of people upset. Please don't crucify me and hear me out. Upscaling is not a bad thing. All the hate it gets is not necessarily deserved because this technology of taking a lower resolution and upscaling it to something that generally doesn't look all that much different than the original image. This technology is so impressive that it blows me away that this is something that wasn't possible just a few years ago. And all of these problems with games and their performance is not necessarily the upscalers themselves, not necessarily their fault. We gotta talk about why in the first place so many games are using upscaling instead of relying on actual optimizations in their settings or giving you more options in general. What it seems like we're in is a major transitionary phase in the way that we're rendering games, and it's hard to tell at this moment if it's a good thing or not. And this will wrap around to upscaling again, because we're currently switching to rendering games with realistic lighting and effects and all photorealistic models to look as impressive as games are right now. We're doing all of these things, but in a way that is in real time, which can sound stupid because aren't we always rendering games in real time? Well, yes and no. Usually in the past, and obviously we can still do this, but generally speaking, we pre-render a lot of the effects or lighting or models that are in games to make them easier to run in the moment. But new games are trying to do that completely differently. It could be like new games using real-time ray tracing to accurately actually simulate lighting, or using technology like Lumen in Unreal Engine 5, which also accurately simulates real-time lighting effects. Older games, generally speaking, just can't do this or nearly as accurately as what ray tracing or Lumen can do. As well, virtual shadow maps, which is one of the features that makes Alan Wake 2 look so good but also be so graphically demanding. Virtual shadow maps are similar to Lumen, and they allow you to do real-time lighting effects in probably the most efficient way that we can right now. Or technology like Nanite, which allows devs to use very high quality assets in their games fluidly and not have to think about it a whole lot. These are all very clever ways to have games react accurately in real time to the environment and the player's actions. But obviously, this is also very graphically expensive and computationally expensive. So we're feeling the brunt of this, especially compared to how games used to be made with pre-rendered effects. Obviously, games can still be made like this today. That's why this is all a little controversial. Is like, should we be moving in this direction? What devs would normally do is actually do these heavy lighting calculations instead of in real time, but doing a process called light baking. Make a ray traced environment and then bake in the lighting to the environment to give it its look, but not be rendering it in real time. Obviously, this is a lot more efficient than rendering out ray tracing in every single frame of your game, but at the same time, it is very static in nature because it can only look one way, and it doesn't react to what's actually happening in the scene. As well as game developers also generally create levels of detail. And this is similar to light baking in a sort of way, where a high quality asset for a game is basically made into a bunch of different and less detailed models, so that these less detailed models can be shown to the player when they're farther away, when you can't really notice the extra detail. The thing about the real-time way that we are rendering games right now is it becomes sort of an if-or situation, because the pre-rendered way of making games does not necessarily translate very well into these new technologies. I mean, devs aren't able to use all of that lighting that they baked into their environments when there's real-time lighting to replace it anyways. And all of these LODs that they spent tons of time creating are completely negated when you go and you turn on Nanite, for example, in UE5. So it seems like devs are caught in a difficult place. If devs choose to go with this real-time approach to rendering their game, the issue is, no matter what, baseline just to play the game is higher than it used to be, because it's a completely different way of approaching rendering games. And that also might be why we're seeing such a small difference between the low settings in a game and the high settings, because that baseline is as low as it can really go. And if you want to give the players the ability to, use these real-time rendering effects, but also the power to run the game more efficiently with the pre-render, then you essentially, as a developer, have to make the game twice. And that is a huge undertaking. So depending on the resources and the time available to certain devs, they might just not think that that's an option. I know if I was a developer, I would be picking the option that gives me the most interactive and most beautiful graphics, but also saved my team the most time possible, because that allows us to work on more important parts of the game, or save on some money, or just do more advertising, or whatever. Clearly, the real-time way of rendering a game seems like the best option, but also sucks that it's very graphically intensive. And that's where this all ties back to upscaling, because just like how we talked about how the baseline for the graphics for this is higher, what other way is there to improve the performance of your games? Upscaling has some other advantages that might pique the interest of a lot of developers, because it improves your performance greatly, while at the same time not really changing the visual presentation of a game all that dramatically. Like, you don't have to turn off shadows in a game. You don't have to turn off global illumination, which can ruin what the artist intended the game to look like in the first place, while upscaling can go to preserve this thing. Now, should upscaling be the only option to do this? I don't really think so, but upscaling might be the best option to preserve the look of a game. Then all of this at the same time, upscalers aren't that difficult to implement into games, which also saves developers a lot of time. However, all of this can really come back to the implementation of the upscalers in the games. Upscalers can look wildly different from game to game. Now, generally speaking, from my experience, and you can watch other videos that I've talked more in depth with this, DLSS is pretty much always the best looking upscaler. However, though, FSR and XESS, the AMD's and Intel's upscalers, can kind of vary from game to game with their quality. In my opinion, in Alan Wake 2, the most recent game that relies on upscaling, both FSR and DLSS look great in this game. However, if you go to a game like Remnant 2, I don't think FSR looked all that good in Remnant 2. If you just see on the backpack here, like it's just kind of ghosting as it goes up and down. And also, if we look back at Starfield, yeah, FSR looked pretty good in this game, but why did this game not ship with DLSS in the first place? If we look at Spider-Man Miles Morales here, I don't think FSR looks good in Spider-Man Miles Morales either. But in Cyberpunk, I think all of the upscalers looked quite good. DLSS kind of taking the crown, but we can clearly see that from game to game, we can see wild variations between each upscaler in these specific games. It's kind of a mixed bag. What are you going to get? The thing is, if studios are going to be relying on upscaling to optimize games or give gamers the opportunity to tinker with their game settings, if that is the only option, really, it should be looking at its absolute best in every single game. That would be a lot better. Now, that is to be said, in my opinion, upscaling, if low settings in games look very good, and basically using upscaling turns into, oh, this is what you would be playing at lower quality. Since that first video, my opinion has shifted slightly. I kind of used to think that upscalers always looked bad, but generally speaking, I would rather turn on upscaling than turn off a bunch of graphics settings. So honestly, I think upscalers are a good thing. You know, it's a weird shifting point for us in the PC gaming community to be going through at this current moment. So yeah, my opinion has shifted slightly, and I want to hear what you guys think on this topic. Is DLSS still ruining games? It's kind of what I'd like to phrase it as. Now, that's been about it for me. Just you guys have a good rest of your day or whatever you're doing, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.